Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging headfirst into some really fascinating source material. We've got transcripts talking about potent ideas like anti-fragility, hormesis, domain dependence, and how we think about risk.
That's right. And our mission really is to unpack these concepts, figure out the core insights the sources are pointing to, and see how they all connect.
Yeah, how they reveal something pretty profound about how systems, and, that includes us as individuals, respond to stress, uncertainty, challenges. It's not just about surviving them.
Exactly. It's about how some systems actually seem to thrive under stress. They get stronger. And we want to explore what these sources say are the crucial nuggets of knowledge here.
It promises to reshape how you look at a lot of things. So the sources suggest starting with some preliminary concepts, ways systems prepare against harm.
Yeah, it's sort of milder forms or precursors to the main idea. They lay the groundwork before we get into the full concept of gaining from disorder.
Okay, let's unpack that starting point. The sources bring up two concepts right away, mithridation and hormesis. They're presented as historical echoes or first steps towards anti-fragility.
Precisely. Mithridation is the older one, almost legendary. It goes back to King Mithridates V of Pontus. The story is, apparently after his father was assassinated, likely by poison, he went into hiding.
And he was worried about the same thing happening to him.
Exactly. So while in hiding, he supposedly started this deliberate practice, taking tiny non-lethal doses of various poisons. And over time, he'd gradually increase the amount.
To build immunity, right, like inoculating himself.
Precisely. Training his body to handle these specific threats. And the famous story, the one everyone remembers, really highlights how effective it was, maybe too effective.
Ah, the suicide attempts.
Right. Later in life, facing defeat by the Romans, he apparently tried to kill himself by taking a massive dose of poison. But nothing happened. His years of mithridization had made him so immune.
Wow, so his own protection stopped him from his desired end. That's ironic.
It really is. The sources mention he had to ask a Gallic mercenary, one of his allies, to kill him with a sword. Pretty stark example of how you can become robust, really robust, against one kind of stressor.
Only for something completely different to be the final cause. You can't proof yourself against everything.
Absolutely. And this method, antidotum mithridatum, became famous. Celsus wrote about it. It became fashionable in Roman high society, apparently, though probably dangerous for amateurs.
Which apparently caused some trouble later for Emperor Nero. This brings us to that rather dark story about Nero and his mother, Agrippina.
Ah, yes. Nero's attempts on his mother's life. The sources had some interesting background on Agrippina, sister of Caligula, maybe even Seneca's lover, a powerful figure.
And clearly someone you wouldn't want as an enemy, even if you were her son.
Definitely. Nero felt threatened by her power, tried multiple times to get rid of her poison, sinking ships, assassins, but Agrippina wasn't naive.
She suspected him, maybe because she'd used poison herself.
The sources suggest that, rumors she poisoned a previous husband. So she was paranoid, aware of the risks, and suspecting Nero, she apparently started her own mithridization program.
Against the common poisons Nero might use.
Exactly. Building up resistance through small, controlled doses. So when Nero did try poison, just like with Mithridates', it didn't work.
But again, the ultimate lesson holds.
Right, you can't proof against everything. Despite her immunity to poison, death eventually came for her via a more mechanical method. Nero's assassins finally succeeded with swords.
So Mithridates and Agrippina both show. You can build strong, specific resistance through exposure, but it's often domain-specific. It doesn't make you invulnerable overall.
Precisely. And the sources note, even 2,000 years later, we still haven't found a way to fortify against all stressors universally.
Yeah.
Death found a way around their specific defenses.
So simply put, mithridation is small doses over time build immunity to larger doses of the same thing.
Yeah. And this sounds very familiar today, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's the basis for vaccination allergy treatments.
Right. The sources explain it clearly. Vaccines introduce a small, weakened, or inactive piece of a virus or bacteria, not enough to cause disease, but enough to trigger the immune system.
So the body learns to recognize it and builds a specific defense. Ready for the real thing. Allergy shots work similarly, right? Small exposures to the allergen.
Exactly the same principle. Controlled exposure builds specific robustness.
Okay, so mithridation is robustness against a specific threat. The sources say this isn't quite anti-fragility yet. It doesn't make the system better overall, just harder to break in that one way.
Correct. It's robustness. But it hints at something crucial. The idea that depriving yourself of these stressors, these poisons, might actually make you fragile.
That the road to robustness starts with exposure, a medicine of harm, medicum of harm. The absence of the challenge could be the problem.
It's a provocative thought, isn't it? That avoiding all challenges weakens us.
Okay, so that's mithridation. What about the next step up the sources mention hormesis?
Hormesis is presented as, well, more profound. This is where a substance or stressor, especially one that's harmful or poisonous in large doses when given in a small dose, doesn't just build resistance. It actually makes the organism better off overall.
Better off. How can something harmful make you better?
That's the fascinating part of hormesis. It's a pharmacological term describing this dose-response effect. A small dose of something, even a known toxin, can produce a beneficial effect. It acts like medicine by triggering an overreaction.
An overreaction, like the system braces for more than it actually got, it overcompensates.
That's the idea. Historically, scientific interest was often in the nonlinearity. The effect isn't just more dose, more effect, it's a curve. Low dose might do nothing, a slightly higher dose is good, then higher doses become bad. It wasn't always framed as gaining from harm, but about understanding that dose dependency.
And this idea wasn't totally new either. Ancients knew about it intuitively.
Seems so. But it got a scientific description later. The sources mention Hugo Swartz, a German toxicologist back in 1888. He saw that tiny doses of poison actually stimulated yeast growth, while larger doses killed it. A clear, early demonstration.
And the sources give modern examples where hormesis might be playing a role, like with vegetables.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. We think vitamins, minerals, fiber. But some research suggests that part of the benefit comes from the mild toxins plants produce to defend themselves. When we eat them in small amounts, these plant chemicals might act as mild stressors, triggering beneficial responses in our bodies. Low-dose biological challenges making us healthier.
And caloric restriction fits this model too.
Yes, that's a major example. Restricting calories, either consistently or intermittently like fasting, is widely studied. In lab animals, it activates healthy pathways, increases lifespan significantly. In humans, the evidence points towards better health, maybe longer health span.
But how is less food like a poisonous substance? It feels different.
The source interprets it through hormesis by flipping the perspective. Maybe the problem isn't the restriction, but our modern state of constant abundance. Maybe never being hungry, never experiencing the mild stressor our bodies evolved with is actually detrimental.
So too much food, constantly available, is the harm, in a sense. And restricting it reintroduces a natural, beneficial level of stress.
That's the interpretation offered. Depriving ourselves of hunger, a stressor our systems are built to handle, means we don't activate those beneficial stress response pathways. Hormesis, in this view, is just reestablishing a more natural pattern. The response to moderate hunger is the norm, and its absence is what hurts us.
Well, that really turns the usual thinking on its head. Comfort and abundance aren't necessarily purely good. We might need some level of challenge.
Exactly. The absence of a natural stressor can degrade the system. Now, the sources do address why hormesis kind of lost favor scientifically for a while after the 1930s. It got wrongly lumped in with homeopathy.
And the sources are careful to distinguish them based only on the provided material.
Very clearly. Homeopathy, alternative system, like cures like highly diluted substances, often undetectable. The sources state it has little empirical backing, considered alternate medicine, mechanism extremely different.
Whereas hormesis?
Hormesis is based on observable dose response. A small dose of an agent triggers a beneficial overreaction. The source states hormesis, as a phenomenon, has ample scientific evidence to back it up.
Yeah.
Key difference: demonstrable biological mechanism versus homeopathy's principles and dilutions.
Okay. So the big takeaway from mithridation and hormesis is this challenge to the idea that all stress is bad. Depriving systems of certain vital stressors might actually be harmful, might weaken them.
It really sets the stage for understanding that exposure to the right kind and level of difficulty isn't just survivable, it can be actively beneficial. It builds strength.
Okay, so we've got these biological hints that systems can benefit from certain stresses, but then the sources shift focus to a major mental barrier why we humans often fail to see this principle playing out elsewhere. This idea called domain dependence.
Yes, this is a crucial cognitive bias. Domain dependence. It's basically our difficulty recognizing the same underlying idea or pattern when it shows up in a different context or domain than where we first learned it.
So you might totally get a concept in physics, but miss the exact same principle working in economics just because it looks different on the surface.
Exactly. The sources give examples. You understand something in medicine, Fail to grasp it in socioeconomic life? You get it in the classroom, but miss it on the street. We seem wired to compartmentalize knowledge based on where we learned it or where we expect to see it.
The Dubai example in the source material really makes this concrete.
Oh, it's very vivid. Picture this scene in, as the source calls it, pseudo-city Dubai. You see a stereotypical banker-type fellow. The source adds a funny note about being allergic to them.
Hmm.
Walking along, porter carrying his bags.
Right, outsourcing the physical effort, comfort.
Minimal effort there. But then, 15 minutes later, same guy, totally different domain. The gym? And what's he doing? Lifting heavy free weights, kettlebell swings, basically, motion similar to carrying heavy bags.
Yeah. So in the gym domain, heavy lifting is good, it's exercise, maybe he's even paying a trainer for it.
Precisely. It's valued there. But outside that specific box, he can't or won't carry his own light bag or a bottle of water upstairs. The source highlights the contradiction. Paying someone to tell you to lift heavy dumbbells, but needing help with a light bag elsewhere. It's a failure to transfer the principle of functional effort outside the exercise domain, pure domain dependence.
It really makes you question how much context dictates our perception of the same action. The source also uses the Federal Reserve example, presented neutrally, to show this bias in economics.
Yeah, a thought experiment. How would a typical American react if some government agency started controlling the price of cars, newspapers, wine? Probably outrage, right? Socialism, communism.
Standard reaction against price controls on everyday stuff.
Okay. Now, what if that same agency controlled foreign exchange, rates the price of the dollar versus the euro? Still likely negative, maybe market interference, not France.
But the punchline is,
The punchline is, the Federal Reserve already controls the price of another crucial good, the interest rate, the cost of borrowing money.
the price of capital.
Right. And the source mentions Ron Paul. He was often called a crank for wanting to restrict the Fed's power over interest rates. But that same Ron Paul would also be called a crane, or worse, for suggesting an agency controlled car prices.
So controlling prices is okay in the specific established domain of monetary policy, but the exact same principle is unacceptable in the domain of consumer goods.
It highlights how the domain itself shapes our judgment, blinding us to the underlying similarity. Price control is price control, but context makes all the difference to our perception.
The language learning analogy drives this home too.
Think about it. Someone brilliant at languages still has to learn the word for chair or love from scratch in each new language. They understand the concept, but need the specific label for that domain. The source says we are handicapped like that more broadly. We struggle to see the same idea when it's wearing different clothes in a different context.
Like the example given about spiritual gurus during the pandemic.
Exactly. Taking knowledge from one domain, spirituality, karma, and applying it directly to explain events in a completely different domain, like public health or epidemiology. Using spiritual frameworks where scientific ones are needed, it's inappropriate extrapolation because the principles aren't transferable in that way. You use science for science, spirituality for spirituality. You can't just swap them because you're an expert in one.
So the big consequence of domain dependence.
We get fooled by superficial stuff, the packing, the gift wrapping, as the source puts it. We miss the deeper structure.
Yeah.
That's why we often don't see anti-fragility in economics or innovation. It's not presented in the accepted way for those domains. It's a mental handicap, the source calls it, and overcoming it, seeing patterns across domains, is key to wisdom, to rationality.
It's like we build these silos of knowledge and domain dependence, keeps the walls up, preventing us from seeing the connections.
A fundamental barrier. Recognizing it is the first step. And it leads us to look more closely at the positive side of stress overcompensation, how hardship can be a catalyst.
Right. Section 3 in the sources dives into harnessing hardship, moving beyond just coping to actually growing. It introduces post-traumatic growth, PTG, the opposite of PTSD.
Exactly. PTG describes this phenomenon where people experience significant trauma or adversity. They don't just bounce back, they surpass their previous state. They become stronger, maybe more appreciative, find new meaning. The source explicitly calls this becoming anti-fragile through trauma, healed out of it better than before.
And the source notes a personal feeling of shame for not knowing about it sooner, given how much focus PTSD gets, the more lurid disorder.
It suggests a bias in our focus, right?
Right.
We concentrate heavily on the negative impacts of randomness, the fragility, which is important, of course, but there's less attention on the positive responses, the growth, the anti-fragility. This isn't just psychology, the source says, it's across board. PTG research exists, but it's often stuck in narrow academic fields.
whereas folk wisdom seems to have grasped this for ages.
Absolutely. It builds character, ancient classics, wisdom from grandmothers. These capture that core idea. Hardship, though painful, can forge strength that wasn't there before.
And this connects directly to how the source views innovation. It challenges the standard view.
Massively. It pushes back hard against the idea that innovation comes mainly from planned R&D, funding, business schools, consultants. Calls that a fallacy.
Instead, the argument is that real innovation often starts from necessity, from hardship.
And crucially, it often goes way beyond just solving the immediate problem. It unlocks new potential. Classical thought again. Sophistication born from hunger, difficulty wakes genius, when life gives you lemons, as the source says, being forced into creativity.
So innovation isn't just resources, it's the excess energy from an overreaction to a setback.
That's the core idea. And the source says it's vastly deeper than it looks, contradicting modern structured approaches. It points to history, the disproportionate contribution of uneducated technicians and entrepreneurs in the Industrial Revolution, Silicon Valley, often came from tinkering out of necessity, outside formal structures.
Right. Innovation happens with constraints, not necessarily in comfortable boardrooms.
Exactly. The source brings in Cato the censor. He saw comfort as a road to waste, fearing it weakened will, softened society. The modern debt crisis is used as an analogy. We're richer than ever, yet more indebted. Suggests we handle abundance poorly compared to scarcity.
A challenging idea, comfort as a source of weakness.
And it leads straight to undercompensation degradation from the absence of stressors. If a system is too comfortable, its capabilities can atrophy. The aeronautics example is perfect.
Automated cockpits making flying too easy for pilots.
Right. Their attention, their manual skills can dull from lack of engagement. The absence of the stressor needing constant active control degrades performance.
And this has contributed to accidents.
The source suggests so. While automation aimed for safety, it inadvertently created this issue of pilots becoming less engaged. Thankfully, the FAA recognized this problem of pilots, checking out mentally. Too much automation removes necessary challenges.
Which connects to fears about AI.
Definitely. If AI takes over all the challenging tasks, will future generations become dumber and dumber from lack of practice? Will our cognitive skills degrade without the stressors that keep them sharp?
Are there other examples of this degradation from lack of stress?
A few quick ones. Best racehorses doing poorly against slower rivals, but excelling against faster ones they need the challenge. Students doing better in a harder calculus class because it demands more focus. Even Baudelaire's albatross, magnificent in the air, clumsy on land. Its strength in one domain, huge wings for flight, becomes a weakness in another. Walking. Shows how ease or overspecialization can create fragility elsewhere.
These really drive home that seeking constant ease isn't just neutral, it can actively weaken us, challenges the default impulse for comfort.
It flips the script. Systems need friction, challenge, to stay optimal, to maintain capability, maybe even to improve.
Okay, so we've got the benefit from stress, the domain dependence barrier, hardship fostering growth. Now let's get into the mechanism, this overcompensation, and how the source links it fundamentally to redundancy.
Right. The sources give some great counterintuitive examples of overcompensation in daily life.
Like hitting the gym after a long flight. Sounds awful.
A small laugh. Yeah, intuition says rest, but the source suggests exertion instead might trigger a stronger overcompensation, helping you bounce back faster than just resting, challenging the system when it's down to elicit a bigger rebound.
And the advice to give urgent tasks to the busiest person.
A classic trick, apparently. The busy person is already in motion, system engaged. They waste less time. Free time, the source argues, can make people lazy because the stressor driving action is gone. Give the busy person more, and they often absorb it efficiently because they're already overcompensating, already operating at high capacity.
Huh. The stress of being busy makes them better at handling more stress. The public speaking paradox is also fascinating. Goes against all standard advice.
Totally. Instead of loud, clear, energetic, maybe even dancing, the source suggests speaking softly, maybe even being slightly inaudible, less polished.
Why would being harder to understand be better?
Because it forces the audience to work, to lean in, focus, filter distractions, process actively. It kicks their brain into intellectual overdrive, engaging them more deeply than passive listening.
Like observing powerful figures, mafia dons or traitors who often spoke quietly.
Exactly. It wasn't weakness, it was confidence. They commanded attention, made others work to hear them. You should have enough presence, the source implies, to make the audience exert effort.
And there's actual evidence for this disfluency effect.
Yes, research shows that a slight difficulty in processing information can actually increase engagement and retention. That mental effort boosts analysis. Think of Drucker or Lacan captivating but not conventionally polished speakers. They made you work.
What about background noise, like in cafes? That fits too.
Another example. For many, a medicum, a small dose of background noise, helps concentration. It engages our brain's natural filtering mechanism. Think of focusing on one chat at a loud party. The noise forces the brain to actively filter and focus. It's countering the noise that sharpens the focus.
So the paradox is we sometimes need the noise, the stressor, to concentrate bad.
Exactly. Sterile silence might not engage those filtering mechanisms for some. Natural sounds, white noise machines, they provide that small, hormetic level of distraction. Up to a point, of course, not a Heathrow runway, needs to be in that beneficial zone.
It's amazing how this overcompensation pops up everywhere once you look, and the source makes this huge connection. All these responses, hormesis, overcompensation, are fundamentally a form of redundancy.
This is presented as a core insight. It's all about redundancy. Nature, the source observes, loves to overinsure itself.
How does it do that? 2 kidneys, 2 lungs.
Exactly. Layers of extra capacity, spare parts, neural systems, arterial systems, lots of built-in backup. It's nature's risk management. Not minimal design, but designs with significant spare capacity.
Which contrasts with how humans often design things.
Often, yeah. Human systems tend towards spare and inertly redundant, prioritizing short-term efficiency. And we engage in debt, the opposite of redundancy. Debt increases fragility. Redundancy builds strength.
But isn't redundancy seen as waste in business? Extra inventory costs money if you don't need it.
Seen as waste if nothing unusual happens. But the source hits back. Something unusual happens usually. Redundancy isn't just passive safety. It can be extremely aggressive.
Aggressive redundancy. How?
Opportunistically. Think of having extra fertilizer inventory. If a shortage hits, that redundancy becomes incredibly valuable. You can sell at a huge premium. Strategic oil reserves, extra cash, same thing.
Yeah.
In volatile times, reserves aren't just insurance. They're investments that pay off big.
And the key link is overcompensation is this kind of redundancy.
Yes. The very same logic applies to overcompensation. It is just a form of redundancy. An extra hydra head, an extra kidney, the extra poison tolerance from hormesis, the extra strength from lifting weights. It's all extra capacity, built-in redundancy.
So the extra motivation or willpower after a setback is like building up reserves.
Like extra boxes of victuals, yeah. The system overshoots, building more capacity than needed for the immediate past challenge, anticipating something worse might come. That extra capacity is redundancy, and it can be used opportunistically later.
It completely flips the view of redundancy from wasteful slack to a dynamic source of strength.
It challenges static thinking. Redundancy is more like investment than insurance. What looks inefficient short-term is often highly efficient long-term in a volatile world.
A powerful connection, anti-fragility, rooted in redundancy.
It shows that growth under uncertainty needs buffers, extra capacity, not just lean optimization.
Oh, okay. But despite nature's wisdom and these examples, humans have this major blind spot in assessing risk, right? The UCRAT problem.
A huge flaw, particularly for risk professionals.
Yeah.
The UCRAT problem. Looking only at the past worst-case event and using that as the estimate for the absolute worst future outcome.
But the flaw is obvious when you spell it out.
It is. They forget that when those past worst cases happened, they exceeded what was considered the worst case before they happened. The assumption is the future can't be worse than the recorded past.
Preparing for the biggest flood on record, but not imagining one even bigger.
Exactly. Named after Eucrates, the philosopher who said the fool thinks that tallest mountain anywhere is the tallest one he's seen. We anchor on our own limited experience or data.
The historical examples really nail this. Ancient Egypt.
Yeah, the scribes tracking the Nile's highest flood mark. They use that number as the future worst case, never imagining it could go higher.
And Fukushima is a tragic modern example.
Perfectly illustrates it. Built to withstand the worst known past earthquake and tsunami.
Ooh.
But the 2011 event was worse than the historical maximum. The design failed because the actual event exceeded the worst case, derived only from past data. They didn't imagine worse was possible.
And Alan Greenspan, after the 2008 crisis.
His classic line, "It never happened before," is pure UCRAT problem, according to the source. Relying solely on past data, unable to conceive of unprecedented events.
And the contrast is stark. Humans fight the last war,
while nature fights the next one. Nature's designs often incorporate redundancy for extremes, beyond past averages or maximums.
Which loops back perfectly to how our bodies adapt in training.
Right. Our biology is more imaginative about the future. When you lift weights, your body overshoots. Lift 330 pounds, it doesn't just prep for 330 again, it anticipates more, builds capacity for maybe 335 or 340. It prepares for a future stress higher than the past maximum.
So our biology implicitly gets it. It doesn't assume the past peak is the limit. It builds anti-fragility.
It's an inherent drive to gain capacity for an uncertain, potentially tougher future, unlike our conscious risk models sometimes.
Speaking of training, the source shares that personal story that ties so much of this together. The threats after the banking crisis.
Yeah, a very concrete application. Initially trying to rationalize the threats away, they threaten after they whack you. But the logic didn't quell the paranoia.
Leading to real anxiety in public, right? Constant scanning, unable to relax.
Exactly. Yeah. Exhausting. Then the bodyguard idea came up. But the source found it more appealing to become like a bodyguard, or at least look like one, cultivating a deterrent presence.
Which led to Lenny Cake, the trainer.
Lenny Cake, described vividly. 280 pounds, 60 years old but moved lightly, nicknamed Cake. Physically intimidating but confidence-inspiring.
And his training method sounds like pure overcompensation in action.
Absolutely. Maximum lifts, PR training. Focus solely on beating your past maximum in one key lift, like a deadlift.
Not endless reps like bodybuilding, just intense focus on exceeding the limit.
Exactly. Short, intense workouts trying to push past that high water mark once or twice, presented as naturalistic, aligning with evidence on strength building. Maximize the signal, then rest.
And how does that embody anti-fragility?
It forces the body to anticipate a higher stress level. Successfully lift 330, your biology prepares for 335 or 340 next time. It doesn't just recover to handle 330 resilience, it overshoots, building extra capacity, redundancy, anticipating a potentially worse future stressor.
And the benefits went beyond just strength.
Massively. The paranoia faded, replaced by calm in public. Feeling physically capable changed the internal state. The source gives that specific example. Calmly telling aggressive drivers at the airport to F off, and then backing down because the physical presence projected capability. Internal anti-fragility showing externally.
Any downsides mentioned?
Just the social perception one. Readers at conferences having a rough time with an intellectual looking like a bodyguard. The joke about intellectuals being supposed to look svelte or flabby, not like butchers, highlights those domain-dependent stereotypes again.
It's a powerful story grounding these ideas in personal experience. Pushing limits builds real capacity.
Makes it practical. And it leads to refining terms like fitness and resilience. A risk analyst noted fitness is ambiguous.
What does it mean? Tuned to the past, or extrapolating for a tougher future?
That's the key question. Many define fitness as just being adapted to the past, which is fragile. But the source argues standard selection models should yield overcompensation anti-fragility, preparing for a more intense future, not just optimizing for history.
And distinguishing anti-fragility from resilience is crucial, especially with PTG data.
Yes. Even experts studying PTG sometimes lapse into calling it resilience.
But the difference is fundamental.
Critical distinction from the source. Resilience is bouncing back to the original state. Anti-fragility is getting stronger because of the stressor.
So psychologists might see recovery and call it resilience, missing the actual growth aspect, the anti-fragility.
Exactly. They see the positive outcome, but might mislabel the mechanism, seeing recovery rather than enhancement by the trauma.
Wow. Okay, this deep dive has covered a lot. From mithridation and hormesis through the barrier of domain dependence to post-traumatic growth, innovation from necessity, the power of redundancy and overcompensation, the flaw of the UCRAT problem, and seeing it all in action with personal training. It really connects a lot of dots.
The core message running through it all is that stressors, volatility, uncertainty, things we usually try to avoid, aren't inherently bad. Within limits, they can be vital inputs that make systems biological, economic, personal, not just robust or resilient, but genuinely anti-fragile, stronger because of the shocks.
And unlocking that understanding requires overcoming that mental block, domain dependence, learning to see these patterns wherever they appear, regardless of the context or label.
Looking past the gift wrapping, seeing the underlying dynamics, it takes conscious effort.
So as you go about your week, here's something to chew on. How do you see these principles, mithridation, hormesis, domain dependence, PTG, redundancy, the UCRAT trap, overcompensation playing out in your own life? In the systems around you, where might you or systems you see be seeking comfort and creating fragility? And where are the hidden opportunities to maybe lean into controlled stress, embrace a bit of volatility, and actually build anti-fragility?
It's a question that, once you start asking it, really can change how you see almost everything.